So I wanted to make this video because it's a response to their video while also being a, I guess, a second part of follow up to a video I've already made. RCS is something that I've talked about now, at least on this channel, probably for about a year and a half or so, but something that I've cared about since I first found out that Google was adding it to Android messages or Google messages, whatever it's called. And I remember I had my little Sony Xperia over there, and I was able to see that it was now active years ago. I think I was living in Mississippi at the time, and I liked it. And I want to take the time to play the video, play the video, respond. If I remember to, I will add some screenshots because there are really just one question that they bring up. But the last thing that I said in my last video was in response to Google's Apple needs to get the message campaign. And I made it quite clear that Google should have sent the message a decade and a half ago. And before we actually start the video, let me get out of here and come back over here. This is what was one of the main talking points of my last video, is that you can't blame Apple for picking something, developing it, and sticking with it when Google hasn't been able to make up its mind for a decade and a half. You can't say, oh, it's Apple's fault that they aren't adopting RCS when Google hasn't been able to make up their mind for 15, well, I think close to 18 years. Let's just say 15 years, because it looks like they might stick with RCS, but it's not Apple's fault. For a while, I've been trying to blame Apple for this, but it's a business decision that Apple's making. But even in terms of, okay, why would I want to adopt something that you, Google, may not even stick with beyond this year, next year, or whatever? It does look like RCS is going to be, here for a while, but it's not Apple's fault. It really isn't. They are deciding to do something, and that's it. Google finally looks like they are deciding to do something and hopefully sticking to it. So in my mind, still would like Apple to adopt RCS. From the video, you'll see that they too think that Apple will never do it. They have no reason to do it. And let's go forward.
So we have Google Messages turning on RCS by default, and group end-to-end encryption is now launched. I noticed this because I was texting from a review phone to another phone that I had, and it was immediately RCS by default on, and I was very happy about that. And I was like, I don't think I turned that on. No, that was cool to see. The iPhone is still no longer involved in this whole RCS thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah. I mean, Google kind of was pushing this ad campaign for the last year or so called Get the Message, where they've been trying to get Apple to adopt RCS or at least allow RCS in the Apple Messages app.
Yep.
Not going to happen. But I think, when Google first launched this, I was like, it feels like they're just being really like weirdly aggressive and like it's not really going to do anything. But I do think that it has helped the general public consciousness kind of like be more on Google's side.
And
overall.
I think that's the intention.
Yeah, I think that's a marketing campaign. Like, I don't think they expect Apple to change it all,
No,
but it's
yeah.
a sweet marketing campaign to be like, hey, look, Apple's not changing this, but we have.
Yeah. I noticed like it's been a very well-received topic by people who find out. It's kind of interesting. Like, I don't think this ad campaign is designed to sell Android phones or to get Apple to actually change anything. But I think because Google knows that there's no shot they ever change it, that they can just push on as hard as they want with this. And if they do actually change, they win. But also if they don't change, everyone just gets to see Apple painted as kind of the bad guy in this one feature war.
Yeah.
We did a video or a short on RCS and this whole part of the battle that they've been waging for a while. And a lot of people in the comments are like, whoa, I didn't know about this. And this is actually crazy. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I remember Hassan Minaj was here. We were talking on The Daily Show. And the same thing happened. Like, he was asking me, why are like the messages, like there are so many different messaging platforms, and like every time I try to message someone, the Android phones don't work with the iPhones. And I actually explained, I think for the first time he's ever heard that, I was like, that's actually by design, right? Like Tim Cook literally
He had never heard that before.
Yeah, he was like, "Yeah,
we live in
buy
such
an
a
iPhone.
bubble.
Like, get your mom an iPhone." And he was like, "Oh, really? That's actually fascinating."
We live in such a bubble.
Yeah,
that's
so
crazy.
So they're getting it out the bubble. They're like
Yeah.
spending money to tell people about this.
I think that them turning it on both by default for new and existing users is like really.
All right, so let me just pause right there and refocusing on Google's Get the Message campaign that they launched, hoping that Apple potentially could make a change. At this point, I am just repeating myself. For everybody that they're referring to, that they might say, all right, well, people weren't just aware of the fact that this was an issue. People aren't aware of the fact that it's really just software. And software can be designed to run on multiple platforms. Heck, let's think about things like your web browser. No matter what phone or what desktop operating system you're using, what physical hardware you're using to run that desktop operating system, there's a good chance you have Chrome, installed. So software, and that, like, if you're watching this video, for you, that might just be like, oh yeah, it's no brainer. But there are a lot of people that don't realize that wait a minute, I can have the same software for the most part, or software from the same company running on different types of hardware. And while I feel with the Messages app on the iPhone, how limited it truly is, that you have a company that makes their own hardware, and on their own hardware, they only allowed their operating system. And in that operating system, there's an app that they only allow in their various operating systems. So that the Apple Messages app that works across iOS, iPadOS, and macOS devices. That's a real narrowing way of looking at it. And there probably are some people that just think that's the way that it's supposed to be. But as I mentioned, Chrome is a perfect example of, I have Chrome installed on this MacBook. I probably will install Chrome on that ThinkPad. I do have Chrome on that, what is that? That's a Pixel 2. I don't have Chrome installed on my iPhone, but I know I can install it. So software can be designed to work across platforms, and a lot of people just don't realize that. But as they've just mentioned that Google might be trying to paint Apple as the bad guy in this particular situation. Yes, younger, naive me, and when I say younger, I mean maybe just 2 weeks ago me, would be like, yeah, Apple is the bad guy. And that's kind of what I've been voicing for the longest too. But as I mentioned before, and I showed it on earlier in the video, the longevity, the amount of time Google has not been able to identify a messaging app or standard, both, and stick with it, isn't Apple's fault. We, the consumers, suffer. So I don't think it's fair for me to say, well, Apple, you need to adopt RCS. I would want them to do it. But if I do that, then I have to say, well, Google, what the fuck took you so long to adopt something and stick with it? Because if you adopted something, and if we, in fact, let's go back to this page, because we're not going to read everything, but if you come down to the table of contents, it essentially starts with stuff back in 2005. Not necessarily saying that, okay, something that was released or adopted in 2005 is something that we should still be using. Not saying that it isn't. Depending on what it was, Google Talk, I know I didn't use it, but if it was something that could have continuously been updated and modified, there's a good chance that Google Talk could have been the default messaging app on Android to this day, and it could have been an app that was available in the Apple App Store that people would download, and then now you have that interoperability if you so see fit. One thing that I do want to point out, where is it? Right here, it says a competitor emerges. iMessage has entered the chat. We're not going to go down there and read it, but it goes to show that there were a few things here that are listed prior to iMessage being a thing, but look how many things have come out since iMessage was a thing. So I keep saying it now. I know I wasn't saying it before, but it is not fair for us to say, all right, finally, Apple, Google has decided to adopt something and stick with it. After all of these not failed attempts, because they probably could have used them and continued working with them, they just decided to kill them. But it's not fair to say Apple, finally Google has adopted something, stuck with it. Now it's up to you to make it better for everybody else. So you need to adopt what they have created. I will say, yes, it does suck that there are two separate platforms and two separate standards, and that Apple won't adopt RCS, most likely, nor will Apple create a messaging app for Android, most likely. So yeah, there will be that constant divide. And yeah, if you are using the default messaging app on your on your platforms, if you're messaging people who are not on your platform of choice, then the experience will be degraded, and you might end up looking elsewhere to message those individual peoples. But let's get back to the video.
Important and really good. It's very rare that a company will auto flip on a switch that you have to opt out of that has already been off. Because generally when you would start using Google Messages and RCS became available to your carrier, there would be a pop-up that was like, do you want to turn on RCS messaging? But like, what? Regular people that don't know what they have no idea what that means.
Exactly.
When it first came out, I like had my specific friends. I turned it on. I was like, I know who has this on right now. I texted like 3 people and then immediately saw like them typing back to me and all the things, and we were all like, oh my god, this is so sick. And I was like, no one cares about this.
I mean, Google is changing like a lot of the verbiage in the Messages app too, because they now, instead of like start a new message, it says start a new chat. And I think they understand that the word chat to people feels more like a free-flowing, like live thing, whereas messaging is more of like an email.
It's like a little old schooler.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, it's crazy that they turned it on by default for everybody. I think that's really good. They had 800 million people using RCS as of I/O. And they said by the end of the year, they'll have over 1 billion. I'm pretty sure this just pushed them over like multiple billion.
It's the easiest way to get to a big number is force it.
But I think it's going to be great overall for...
So my air just kicked on again, so I apologize. I will speak a little bit louder. Hopefully the mics block some of that out. But as they're talking about numbers, I mean, Google's numbers were what? I think 700 million, and they're hoping to have over 1 billion by the end of the year. I just checked my phone, and I know who I've been using RCS with, or at least was when I was using this Android phone as my primary device. And I just checked 2 people who I know have Android devices, but RCS does not automatically pop on. So there's one right there. And let me check somebody else. Yeah, so I don't know what app they're using. In fact, let me check a third person who I also know has an Android device. And yeah, still just regular text messages with all 3 of them. So even if Google does flip it on, there are people who aren't using messages. There are people who have older phones where I don't think Google Messages was the default messaging app when they turned on the device. There might be other people, who download stuff and just choose to use something else, So, it's not a foolproof thing. Whereas with the iPhone, I would like to talk to somebody who has an iPhone and who has intentionally turned off iMessage. Like I would really ask why. Like what prompted you to do that? Whereas with the Android stuff, there's no guarantee that Google just flipping a switch is going to affect everybody.
A lot of people who now just start texting each other and all of a sudden they have like, rich messaging features.
I was going to say, it feels like there's no downside.
Yeah.
Just in the way I'm looking at it. I think if you asked Apple or if you asked other companies, they'd be like, well, this is the Google RCS, or there are certain things that they don't want to like jump in with Google on. But generally, if I'm a user, it's like, oh, you just turned on encryption for me, you just added features for me, and you just gave me like typing indicators and reactions. I feel like that's a win.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that over the next few years, like the sooner they were going to get this out the door, the better. Because over the next few years, it'll become less and less of a meme that Google doesn't have a competitor to iMessage, which I think is really good. Because throughout most of the world, Android phones are way more popular than the iPhone.
Yeah.
So just being able to have something to compete with that is good. The group end-to-end encryption finally being live, also very important, because when you would talk about RCS to people, a lot of people who were sort of in the know would be like, RCS is still a joke because it doesn't have group end-to-end encryption. They mentioned that they were going to do this like over 2 years ago. Single user to user and encryption through RCS launched over 2 years ago.
It's been a while, yeah.
And they've said we're working on group messaging and encryption forever, and they just launched it.
And that right there doesn't solidify the point that I was attempting to make earlier. But time is of the essence when it comes to a lot of tech. And if a single feature like this, which is important, but something that should have been in the works a long time ago and shouldn't have taken 2 years for them to finally roll out, you can't blame Apple for not wanting to jump on board. And you can't say Apple is the bad guy because they're in their little bubble and they're working out everything the way that they want to work it out. You just can't. So Google, they move slow sometimes, so does Apple. But Google kills a lot of things and Apple kills some stuff too. But this is one of those things where I know my mind has flipped almost completely 180 degrees in terms of who I feel I should be blaming when it comes to my compromised messaging experience when I'm messaging with somebody on the other platform.